Okay. Thank you so much for coming to this interview. Thank you for participating in this project. We will get right into the questions, but I sort of want to hear, your introduction, your presentation of yourself. So, could you briefly explain who you are, what sort of career path you've taken, what you do now, and what you see yourself doing in the near future?
Thank you for inviting me, first of all. My name is Gizem Halis-Kasap. I'm a lecturer in private international law, and I'm a lawyer licensed to practice in both New York and Turkey. I completed my undergraduate studies at Istanbul University Faculty of Law, which is one of the Turkey's oldest and most prestigious legal institutions.
Hmm.
And I later earned my LL.M degree from Penn State University in the United States. And following that, I pursued a doctorate degree at Wake Forest University School of Law, where I conducted a comparative research on arbitration and the public policy exception in arbitration. So this is who I am at this moment. I am mostly on the academic side, and I'm happy to have your answer your questions.
Okay, perfect. So, looking at sort of what brought you to the law, I mean, were there any experiences that made you say at the very start in Turkey, I want to study law? Were there any, cultural aspects of your upbringing that did so? Was it a pragmatic decision of, getting into a lucrative field? What sort of brought you into the law in the first place?
I think what drew me to law was a moment of clarity while, I was reviewing the university programs. It was
Hmm.
very back. It was 2009, I believe. And I came across the law curriculum and I was instantly, captivated by this structure. There was a constitutional law and the contracts, administrative law, and it was for the first time, I guess, I really paid attention to such curriculum because before
Hmm.
then I was not really thinking of studying law. So I was impressed how the law school curriculum combined the logic and the justice and some sort of societal relevance on it. So that discovery actually shifted my path. And then I started my studies at Istanbul University, although I was not thinking of law school then. Um, for my cultural upbringing, I wouldn't say like something particular, but I mean, it was always rooted in the values of fairness, discipline,
Hmm.
some strong sense of social responsibility. So that probably influenced this decision. So for me, studying law wasn't just an academic pursuit. It was like when I saw that curriculum, I think that this is just a way to understand the world, question
Hmm.
and actually contribute the world around me. I was thinking, one day I can be one of the lawmakers. I mean, I never
Hmm.
intend to do that, but I have a chance of being such person. So that the
Hmm.
thing that kind of impressed me. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, you could have, in your sort of legal education, said, you know what, I want to be a Turkish lawyer. I want to stay here, and sort of planted yourself. What sort of brought you to pursue education or opportunities abroad? Why go to the United States?
Coming from a civil background, I was always, not always, but at the end of my legal education, I started curious about the common law systems and how it differently it approached legal reasoning, like interpretation, advocacy. That sort of intellectual curiosity actually motivated me to pursue graduate legal education in the United States. Because in there, where I had the chance to explore those, contracts or those different ideas in depth. So for example, there's a defining moment I could say as I was taking a class during my LLM studies at Istanbul University. We were having a class with Dr. Yildirim, Akayan Yildirim, and I took a course on CASG's international treaty on contracts. And there are many concepts in there that combine civil law and the common law. And many of the concepts, like those case-based reasoning, the sort of flexible interpretation in the CASG, it felt very unfamiliar to me. I
Hmm.
thought that is very abstract, within our civil law framework. So that was the first moment, I guess. that experience sparked my curiosity about the common law tradition. And after that, it motivated me to study in the US because there were other countries that I could choose and go, like Germany or other like civil law-based countries. But I wanted to learn something different, I guess, because I'm always impressed how people come up with different solutions to the same problem. So I guess I wanted to better understand those approaches, kind of gain a comparative legal perspective.
Mhm. Okay, so sort of looking at your going from a Turkish educational setting to an American one, what sort of differences stood out to you most? I mean, were there any cultural differences, approach differences, systemic differences? And this sort of the list can go on. But what in your experience was the most sort of tangible, standout difference between these two settings?
I mean, I can easily say that, transition to the US legal education was challenging for me, even though back home I had always been an active participant in the class.
Mhm.
So in our civil law tradition, learning is mostly centered around the statutes, the lectures, there's structured legal doctrine, so that's the science. I mean, law is practiced as a science. I wouldn't
Mhm.
say even practice, like study as science. So in contrast, US legal education is mostly driven by the case law. There's a
Mhm.
classroom dialogue and the Socratic method, which actually like felt overwhelming at first.
Mhm.
But I had to quickly, adapt to reading and briefing those cases, thinking in terms of precedent rather than, going for statutes and is there any law for that? Is there any statute for that? It was mostly case law basis side make it challenging for me. But
Mhm.
after that, I started developing arguments through questioning rather than recitation of the, books and the statutes. And there was a steep learning curve, I would say,
Mhm.
but ultimately that experience broadened my legal thinking and it gave me a more sharpened analytical approach.
Mhm.
So, uh, I mean, the one that most stood out to me, I would say how they approached law. One is approaching is more like a science, like our
Mhm.
system. And in the US, I think it's more like practice based, it's more like
Mhm.
precedent based. So that was the part that I also struggled the most.
Mhm. So, looking at sort of what that difference, how that transition had an impact on you, do you think sort of having this Turkish first base education and then building on top of that in a different context, do you think that shaped or reshaped your sort of legal identity, your professional development? If yes, then how so?
Um, I think like when I was comparing those legal systems, there was a defining moment for the first time when I was taking the contracts class. We
Hmm.
were learning about the concept of consideration, which is one of the main aspects in the US contract law. In
Hmm.
Turkey, there's a contract. I mean, contract is valid with mutual consent. There's consent, acceptance, offer, and then if there's lawful purpose, then other, of course, elements. There's no need for exchange of value, in the same formal sense as in US. But
Hmm.
in the US, consideration is something essential. It should be typically tangible, something monetary, it must be exchanged, for contract to be enforceable. So I found that this is actually, I mean, it felt at that moment that this is more than a legal technicality. I think it's like a part of the difference, part of how to say, like cultural difference,
Hmm.
because in the US there's a more transactional, economically driven approach to those private agreements.
Hmm.
So understanding, I mean, this is just one of the difference, but understanding this difference helped me to rethink the mechanics of the contract law, the
Hmm.
values of values behind the legal system. So it's just not, I had to adjust from interpreting the rules strictly through codes, through the books. Then from there, I need to start engaging with the case law, like the policy reasoning, why that law exists, and there's the economic logic behind that. So uh, changing my perspective in that sense helped me understanding the U.S. legal principles. So, from my perspective, I think like succeeding in a different legal system, it's more than a knowledge. It's, you need to shift your perspective. So you need to, if you want to truly engage with another legal system, you kind of have to reorient yourself, your legal logic, and also your cultural lens. So this is, I mean, consideration is one of the examples, but I'm sure like there are many like that.
Mhm. So, sort of finding a sort of medium between those two things that you said, which is the logic versus the cultural perspective, and sort of looking at more tangible skills, for example, like the communication, written, oral, all these different things. Did you find any challenges in sort of the language transition not just in the pragmatics of, choosing what words in English, but choosing how you write, the style and the voice with which you write? Do you find that you sort of had a different voice in Turkish versus you had to find a new one in English, a new style, for example?
Right. I mean, I would say I was actually struggling with the very basic part at first, even like the part that you said, finding the right word, rather than, which one will be better. I couldn't even start there. So
Hmm.
studying and practicing law in English actually was very significant, came with a very significant challenge
Hmm.
for me. I didn't have a strong English background during the law school in Turkey, and only began working on it seriously after graduation, near graduation, while preparing for exams like TOEFL.
Hmm.
So English wasn't essential during my undergrad studies because I often avoided speaking this subject altogether. And then
Hmm.
when I started my graduate studies in the US, adapting to legal writing and oral advocacy in English, of course, took time and effort. And what helped me, I guess, this transition was the strong legal foundation I had developed during my time at Istanbul University. So even when I struggled with the language, I could grasp the legal concepts being taught to me by the, US lecturers. So that understanding kind of gave me the confidence of keep going, even when
Hmm.
expressing those ideas in English felt like difficult. And I mean, of course, I committed myself to improve my language skills alongside those like legal studies that during my time in the US. And I think that hard work paid off, and I received a Cali Award, which Cali Award in International Litigation Arbitration. This award is a meaningless because it says that you're the, high scoring students in that class. And it was meaningful for me because I was studying that class alongside the native speakers who were like they were attending the class regularly, and I was trying to, make myself like part of the class. I was struggling, but there were others with the excellent English skills, but I was the one, who achieved that top distinction. So it showed me that hard work truly pays off, regardless of where you start. Um, so even if like you don't have the basic English skills, that's another part. But after you have those English skills, like after you can express yourself, then you have to refine it, which is also um, I think, it comes with other sort of challenges, of course.
And sort of what were those challenges? What did you find going forward from that basis?
Um, I think say finding the right words and finding the words that are culturally appropriate
Hmm.
and the sentence structures because you shouldn't think as a Turkish native like speaker. You should think like a English speaker, and then you need to you know uh, adapt your sentence like that. So that was the part that I guess I mean most of the people I believe this is the part they have struggles because I believe there's also a study like when you have if you're a bilingual speaker, you have different way of thinking. If when you're like Turkish, you speak differently in English. English speaking country, you speak differently, and it gives you different way of thinking. So I think achieving that mindfulness when you're in an English speaking environment, that was hard, but it came with the time. I mean, I worked on it and it developed. So yeah, there are some levels of it, of course, but yeah, I think most of the it's about refining, I would say. So choosing
Hmm.
the right words, right structures. Yeah, that's mostly
Hmm.
about it.
Sort of, I want to focus on something you said, which is choosing the culturally appropriate words. In the sort of not semantics, but in the minutia of the sort of writing, of course, you pick the different words. Do you find that there's a culturally appropriate way of arguing, a culturally appropriate way of writing in Turkish versus English? Sort of how you approach an argument, how you approach a case, how you approach an idea that might have been different as well.
I think that's a very good question. I mean, I never thought about that. Now I'm thinking it's a deep question. Um, When I think of like being culturally appropriate, my first instinct is that when we translate this to Turkish or when we translate to English, how does it sound right in that legal sense, you know? Does it mean something else that we don't want to have any consequences, negative consequences? That's one part of it. So I don't attribute maybe any cultural values. But when I think of like, when I say culturally, if there's a non-English speaker who would translate that document from English to Turkish, I want to make sure that if I'm working on that document, that speaker, when that person who received that document, when he or she translated, through Google Documents, I want to make sure that he or she at least have the basic idea, not the things that just unintended meanings. Of course, like Google Translate is not the best way to translate, but I
Mhm.
just want to avoid the word choices that, that cause some troubles. I would say that, yeah. Though probably it's not answer to your question. It's not totally cultural, but yeah, maybe some aspect of it.
Mhm. So going a little broader in terms of the communication, you've had prolonged experience in the US in the sort of academic field doing research and learning and all these different aspects. Did you find that there were different ways in which, for example, Turkish educators or professionals built relationships with students and one another versus American educators and professionals built relationships, what they expected from those relationships, how they approached them, how they maybe delineated between the sort of professional aspects versus the personal aspects. What were these differences in the relationship building?
Yeah, that was also one of the things that made me surprised during my time because I remember like calling the professor by his first name, which like how we can call him like that. I was just so
Mm.
surprised. I was saying like sir, and then by time I just got evolved in that sense. And then of course, you're not equivalent with your professors in the US too. There's some sort of respect, but you are more assertive. You can be more assertive. You can just argue. But in Turkey, there's a more hierarchical sense in our dialogues. We use, I mean, we love, I mean, we have to show respect. That's one thing, but sometimes it keep us, reflecting what we really think,
Hmm.
and so a little like self-censorship, I guess. So that was the part I think I would say, like in an answer to your question. And in the US, there's also, I guess, accepted normal, regular to, have some personal relationship with your professors, with the lecturers. It's more easy to go into their rooms during the office hours, even like just email to them. I think the communication is easier there rather than in Turkey. There's that sort of level of respect sometimes hinders the true engagement with the lecturer. But of course, it depends on the lecturer. I mean, now younger lecturers, I would say, and the ones that more more open-minded, that will be, I mean, they will be more open to, engaging with the students.
Hmm. All right. So bringing sort of all of this previous conversation about communication and from the very basics to the cultural approach and relationship with an advisor, with an educator. Um, in your transition, what did you feel were the major areas in which you had to consciously adapt? Picking the words, picking sentences, picking arguments, picking relationships in all these different areas. How did you feel that you needed to sort of chameleon yourself into being more appropriate in that given situation?
Hmm. Um, I mean, it depends on in which legal environment. environment I would operate, if I and writing something in the US legal system, you using the IRAC system, issue rule application conclusion sort of methods is especially helpful. But in Turkey, there's more, emphasis on the legal doctrine and the like analysis in the scientific sense.
Mhm.
So I would mostly say, who is the receiver of my work and how should adapt my work I mean, what is expected from me? I guess I'm thinking of that and I shape my work accordingly. So if I'm in Turkey, like what I do it for what I do for the Turkish legal piece, for example, there should be more trueness, more structure. But for the common law part, I guess there's like more legal reasoning analysis and then especially case law based. So that kind of differences. I think I'm open to both, though I enjoy writing and using the style that I developed during my postgraduate studies in the US. I enjoyed that more, honestly. But still, I'm thinking of who is my receiver and what is expected from me, and then I just kind of adapt myself accordingly. So that's how I operate.
Fair enough. So, sort of moving on from this and transitioning to, again, a more cultural, a broader approach, I do want to start with sort of asking you, how do you think the sort of role of a lawyer, a legal practitioner, a legal educator are perceived differently, the roles and responsibilities in Turkey versus in the US?
Mm. Could you repeat that question again? Yeah.
So, what's the sort of role of a lawyer in society? What's the role of a legal educator in society? Is it sort of very much career based in terms of, you know the sort of civil law system, you know the statutes, you know this, you know that. So you impart that upon somebody else versus you teach to make some change. Your goal is social change, your goal is uplifting people or etc. Sort of what is expected of your job in terms of its impact, what's expected in terms of its approach, what's expected in terms of what it does day to day in Turkey versus in the US.
Right. I think from the legal education side, because the US law school is the second school, I would say, like it's in a sense, it's a postgraduate school, even we can say because it's a JD degree,
Mhm.
right? So those people, those law students attend there by, I mean, through their own wills, they make this choice after finishing 4-year bachelor degree. They decide to study 3 more years. And so that law students expect more from the legal educator. They ask more questions. They want more structured approach. They want to see the curriculum. They want to know the office hours. And of course, there's a part that, they have to pass the bar exam and they're paying for the law schools. I guess that's also part of it. And for Turkey, I think being in the law school when you're like 18 or 19 years old might be a bit early. So I'm not saying that we should have this law school as the upper level education, but maybe I don't know, some sort of 2 or 1 year like preparation classes, because at that time I'm remembering myself at 18 years old. I'm trying to learn about constitutional law, which is very essential, very deep. And then you're just graduated from the high school. I think it's too early. And then you
Mhm.
ended up being a judge when you're like 23, 24. Things are, progressing a bit fast in Turkey. Like that's I guess. I mean, it's not quite answer to your question, but what is expected from the legal educator? If I answer that, I think the US counterparts have more responsibility in terms of providing students, law students, because there are very eager students, like students hungry to learn in front of them. So they have to prepare themselves accordingly. I would say that.
So, would you say that Turkish students are less eager to learn? I mean, is
No,
there?
I
Okay.
wouldn't say that. Of course, there are some quite good and hardworking students, dedicated students. But I'm saying that when you're 18 years old, 19 years old, maybe you're not just ready to be such dedicated in the law school. At that time, those concepts, I mean, you can pass those classes, that's fine, but how much you really learned is acceptable. So I only say maybe being mature enough to be attend the law school, then to be a judge, then to be a lawyer. That there should be a threshold. I'm not the one to set that threshold, but I believe that should be on the later end of the spectrum.
Mhm. Interesting. So, a question that I have is sort of with regards to that is, there's certainly an aspect of maturity that goes into dedicating yourself to not just sort of understanding the statute versus the statute, but understanding the law as a sort of living, breathing part of society as a whole. But do you think there's anything cultural that goes into that? Perhaps Turkish culture's view on hierarchy and order versus American culture's view on hierarchy and order that changed the way that, the students that you've been alongside with or you've taught view the law, view the legal professions, or the way that you have viewed the legal profession across sort of learning these two different cultures? And what would those sort of aspects be that you'd want to highlight?
Right. I mean, uh, I can answer through my perspective on students, but also in general, I can see that I need to adapt my communication style and my relationship, depending on that legal system, depending on who's my audience. Like, for example, in Turkey, there's a more formal approach, more respectful tone, when you're addressing courts and senior colleagues. And of course, when you say, like, as you said, there's such hierarchical structure of the profession. So in the US, it's more direct. You need to be concise, you need to be assertive. It's not just on your speech that you're addressing people, in your writing too. It's just you're trying to make things easier for that judge, for your student too. Like whoever your audience is, you're just trying to craft your work because this is your responsibility, not the readers or the recipient's responsibility to understand. You make them understand what you want them to understand.
Mhm.
So I would say that. And also, I think from the cultural side, in Turkey, there's often a cultural expectation to offer, reassurances along with your legal analysis. You're not explaining what the law says, but you need to express your confidence in that, in that likely outcome that you're saying. You need to show empathy for the concern of that people who are
Mhm.
receiving legal advice. So. I think it's more relational and supportive
Mhm.
on the Turkish side, and this is probably part of this cultural emphasis on the trust of that profession of that lawyer. Like they want to trust you. They want to
Mhm.
put it in that uh, they see you kind of a senior, even though they're in different. Even though they're very rich, like let's say they're CEO of a company, they want to still see that lawyer as an expert on this. They got that assurance. They want to get that assurance. Um, for the US side, like let's say you have a legal opinion, you are more neutral, like you're providing the outcome, you're saying the risks are that, options are there, you're giving conclusion, you're not uh being reassuring with your language. Like this is not the thing that is expected from me. You're just trying to be objective.
Mhm.
Uh so I think depends on who is your audience, and that's so you need to learn like balance those expectations. So if you needed to, of course, you need to reassure the recipient of that legal advice or the person receiving that advice. I'm not saying that, I have like two different personalities. It's not that. You're just trying to, balance that and trying to understand what is expected from you. And I guess, yeah, that's part of the difference in communicating in those different legal systems.
Mhm. Sort of on that, I mean, this idea of like balancing the two different sides, not personalities, the two different sides, and and experiences often has this connotation of, oh, it's an impediment. I don't have the same background as these American students, therefore they have a leg up on me. But have you ever had any experiences where that sort of bicultural background, that educational, and but not only that, the personal background has been an asset to you in resolving challenges and in facing sort of these interpersonal clashes? Were there any positives to that you experienced?
Yes, I think I can say yes to that because I was working in a US law firm during my time in the US, like sort of interning. There was a case involving in non-US parties, and uh, even though I was not like a senior lawyer there, I realized I kind of contribute not just legally, but like culturally explaining those unspoken expectations from those European parties, sort of clarifying some sort of misunderstandings. And I kind of help understand both sides, help both sides to better understand each other.
Mm,
And so I think being a bicultural is not just a background detail, you saw it on your CV or just among the friends. It just, I really believe that it's a bridge that adds a real value in the global legal practice. So, of course, like legal skills are essential. You need to listen, adapt, like translate between legal cultural system. That's fine. But being a bicultural and using those legal skills that can make you impact how you practice that black letter of law, and it makes you stand apart from the others. So I say like we shouldn't underestimate it. It can be powerful at times.
mhm. Fair enough.
Yeah.
And sort of bringing together all of the different threads of this cultural aspect, I want to focus on one aspect, which I think is stressed a little more in American legal systems, but not just that, in the sort of culture. This idea of advocacy. That this was an idea that came up in previous interviews as well, which is, in Turkey, you focus on sort of resolving a conflict in the best interest of the party that you're representing. Of course, that's sort of what a lawyer does professionally, but you're not focusing very much on, what implication your practice or your study might have on society. You're focusing on what impact you'll have on the one person who's paying you the money to do this. Again, I'm not saying that this isn't the American way as well, but do you find that, in this, when this idea of advocacy comes up, advocating for change, advocating for a cause, advocating for anything along those lines in your practice, there's been a different approach in the Turkish system versus in the American system, in the education versus in the two forums?
Right. I mean, certainly, yes.
Mm,
Because especially in terms of negotiation, see, like in negotiation in Turkey, it's not just exchange of numbers. You're expected to be like at fault. Sometimes you need to make amends, not just like I give you that much and we're all done sort of thing.
mm,
And growing up in a culture like in Turkey where the communication is like, often indirect, like things are relationship based. So I have a tendency to approach disagreements with like diplomacy and patience. This is what I grew up with. But
mhm,
at the same time, my legal training like includes more direct systems like the US. So there I learned to be more clear, more structured, like assertive, honestly. Like one of the things that I learned there to be assertive. So when needed, you just need to be assertive. So using those different sides that allows my style to adapt the different audience and different settings. And I think after being in the US, I learned to question more actively, argue more directly. Even though, again, like back home, I was a student who tried to, argue during the class. But sometimes I had instances like where I said my opinion, my other like friends, peers saying that why do you argue this? Like, why do you keep, arguing on this point? But when I end up in the US in the legal classes, it just part of this learning process, it's just dialogue based, it's a Socratic method. So I kind of like that. And of course, I like our I like our indirect sides in Turkish relationships. So sometimes those diplomacy, those patience. Yes, it doesn't make things clear, but sometimes there are no hard feelings, things are just not unspoken. It just, it's fine, it just goes away. So again, like, I think depends on which setting you're operating. You just need to orient your structure and orient your critical thinking and how you address those differences.
Okay. So sort of taking a step beyond that and looking at your global journey at large, because you have one background and now you have another potential future avenue that you're exploring. Um, do you find yourself in this sort of cultural legal education to be identifying as a Turkish lawyer or an American lawyer or any other lawyer versus a global lawyer? Do you think, there's this sort of place-based definition that you impose upon yourself, or do you think that a more global approach has given you the perspective that you would find necessary to claim the mantle of a global legal educator?
Right. I think I don't want to define myself as a Turkish lawyer and like as a New York lawyer. No, it doesn't reflect who am I really. So
Mhm.
I have a side of global lawyer and the legal educator, on global legal educator. So, and I see my role rather like as someone who, who not only understands like multiple legal systems, but also bridges cultures through law. Uh, so like I remember like studying law is not just like comparing those different systems. So I remember one of my classes, I was teaching BP Horizon case. It was a like gas leak, petrol leak in Florida Gulf Coast, I guess. So the BP was a English-based company, UK-based company, and rather than suing that party in UK, the plaintiffs, of course, came to US because they can obtain more high awards. There's a jury trial as plaintiff-friendly jurisdiction. So yes, you can know you may know I mean UK law. You can even know the US law and then Turkish law, and then you can compare it. That's one thing. But also you need to think of like, is the good idea bringing this case in the UK or like US? And even though Black Letter of says US is a good avenue, like can I have this case enforced in another country, like in UK, or like does it cost me high in the US? Like so not just knowing the black letter of law, but also using your analysis, using your critical thinking to understand those complex legal ideas across jurisdictions. And I think my role is that I'm trying to be a bridge for future lawyers, for my students. Like I'm trying to make them think critically in a global context, not just, Turkish or like another language. And coming from a bicultural background, I mean, I'm not sure if I can bicultural, like biculturally educated, I might say. So it helps me anticipate the misunderstandings, It helps me to frame the legal information in a way that resonate with different legal and cultural expectations. So that's something that I'm trying to convey to my students. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm trying to, I guess I would say, not just legally sound students, but also intellectually rich and the personally meaningful, like the person who understands the details, sense who can sense the feelings in that room. That sort of lawyer I'm trying to create out of my students, I would say.
So, I mean, the fact that you feel this need to cross the bridges yourself or to impart upon your students the ability to cross those bridges suggests to me at least that there's sort of a lacking in the cross-cultural understanding in the legal profession as it exists today. So why do you think that is? I mean, why do people who might not have this education struggle to communicate across cultures, communicate across expectations, communicate across, what they seek out of that communication? And what more systemic remedies would you find necessary going forward?
I mean, honestly, being in Turkey and trying to understand the US legal education is something hard, and vice versa. It's just you need to be there, you need to experience that. It's just not the black letter of law.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, yes, you can have some US introduction to US law courses here. It's fine, you can have some basic idea. But what I'm saying is more like a experience, like a whole package. When you end up in the US or UK, other jurisdiction, you just have that feeling like all these things come together,
Hmm.
and not just like you're learning the contract law from a book. It's not just like that. Other
Hmm.
classes connect to that. There's a pro bono commitments. You go sit onto the legal clinics. It's just a big legal system, education system that teaches to you, instill this to you. And I know like not everyone can go to UK or US law school. It's expensive. Uh, I'm one of the persons who know this from the first hand because I'm also one who received a scholarship and ended up studying in those schools. Um, so I'm saying if you are financially viable, can afford that, rather than trying to do this in Turkey or in the country where you're living, through online courses. Just go in that country, go in that jurisdiction where you want to learn the law, experience the law, and learn the black letter of law through the classes, but also, go to the pro bono commitments, do the clinics, do the internship, visit the courtrooms, like whole experience, I would say. Um, I forget the question, I'm sorry. So, but
No,
we're
no, that was perfect.
yeah,
Um,
I think
eh,
financial struggles, I would say. And
mhm.
what can we do to change? Again, it depends on how much opportunities, what are the opportunities you have. Right now, through the internet, everything is certainly way easier. And even if you cannot go those jurisdictions, be here and try to do whatever you can do best. I mean, take the courses, even you can take the bar exam. Like I know people who just lives in Turkey who never ended up in like California or New York, but took the bar exam and passed it. Like, so if you want to achieve that title, you can do it. It's still fine as long as you're dedicated. You can do it. Like, I'm not saying that if you don't go to the LLM course in person, you cannot achieve that. So there are ways, but what I'm saying is that experience itself, even though you don't get the degree, if you have a chance to go and like intern in a US law firm, kind of not interning in the legal sense, but shadowing lawyers, like maybe you have someone, a contact that you can do that, it's still fine. It can still give you that sort of idea that I'm trying to convey.
So to those Turkish law students or young lawyers who, pursue the experiential, the immersive of coming to the US, LLM, JD, SJD in those different settings, what advice would you have? I mean, you've navigated that transition yourself. What strategies were useful to you? What approaches did you find were necessary? And, what lessons did you learn through experience? Hard lessons did you learn through that you can, tell somebody about so that they can avoid something that, for example, you ran into a problem?
I think my first advice will be the language skills. Just get the language down and go to the like LLM and doctorate degree, start your degree then, because otherwise you have to try to juggle both and it's
Hmm.
hard. And I would advise, Turkish law students, like any law students or young lawyers, to focus on building a strong legal foundation first. Like, if get your LLB done first, in a good sense, in a strong sense, because it will support you even when you have problems, when language or cultural barriers feel overwhelming.
Hmm.
And don't get discouraged by the initial struggles with English. Like, language improves with time and practice, and especially if you engage actively in class and seek feedback, just don't be shy on that end. And I also suggest them to, be open to new ways of thinking and like learning, because especially like the systems in the US where the participation to the class, like case analysis, practical problem solving, like negotiation in a class, those mood course, something like that. It's really emphasized in that system. So I guess what helped me, one of the things that helped me most is also being adaptable. Like I was dedicated, sure, but I was also adaptable. So I was asking questions without fear, even though my language at that time was still limited. I was doing that. And then by the time during my doctorate degree, it was just gone. I was asking questions without fear. I was finding, during my time, during the LLM, I was finding mentors, and these mentors, students, your peers too, who understood the both system, like coming from UK, coming from other countries with common law. So that can help you mentoring.
Okay. I think that's sort of wonderful advice, but sort of keeping an eye on the clock. I want to be respectful of your time as well. I do sort of want to ask one final question, which is, we've spoken a lot about your experiences. We've spoken about the general trends, but would there be any specific stories, any specific, times or days or challenges that you ran into that you'd want to share as that were especially meaningful to you in your journey as a lawyer across cultures?
I think I kind of mentioned that during our talk, but during my time at that US law firm, there was a case like we were working involving the non-US parties. It was about GDPR, and privacy is, I mean, kind of a subject for Americans that in terms of law, it's not really regulated. Maybe like California side is better protections. But in general, most of the information that should be private, it's very available there, easily you can find it, that sort of thing. And there's GDPR. It was a time that GDPR regulated at the time, entered into force. So there was some sort of unspoken expectation between the US party and the EU party, and I was helping them to clarify those misunderstandings. I helped them to understand each other. So I remember at the time that, yes, it's just not something that I'm coming from a legal background and now I have the US legal education. It's not just a line on the CV. You can actually meaningfully uh, add something to the table, So that was a time that kind of stood out for me. Yeah, and I think for the second one was the Kelly Award that I achieved. So I was not expecting that. And I guess I tried too hard that I had that distinction. So I was not really, I mean, I was of course happy with the award itself, but I was happy with seeing the result that, hard work pays off. When you study
Mhm.
hard, when you put dedication, you can achieve it. So that was, yeah, one of the two moments I guess I remember it now.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. I really appreciate you participating in this project. And if you don't have any further, burning things to add, I think we can sort of conclude the interview.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And I'm honestly looking for other interviews and I want to see what comes out of this project. I think that's a great initiative and I'm proud of this initiative itself, like how where it goes and so I wanna yeah, I will be on the lookout and see and following. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you.